First, we have Tadas Utikas from Darwin College, Cambridge University, who will be talking about healthcare entrepreneurship in the Baltic States. So he won't be actually talking about his research, but he will mostly be talking about how the sort of research he does might be relevant for the Baltic economies yes. So next up is Claire Kama from the School of Geography and St. Catherine's College, Oxford, and she will talk about energy governance and technology development in Estonia. That actually quite well links up to some of the presentations we had this morning. And finally, we have Tauri Tuvikene from the Department of Geography at University College London, who will be talking about state intervention and individual freedom under post-socialism. There will be a bit about car parking, but sometimes things that may look from a distance or for the uninitiated, slightly obscure, may be actually very, very relevant. So, without much further ado, I'll give over to Tadas.
Thank you very much for a good presentation. Dear ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure and honor to be here today. I had a great day, and I hope that the last panel will also be interesting for you. I'm very excited to speak about life sciences and healthcare, entrepreneurship and research, because I believe that Baltic states are ideal for taking up these new and very fastly developing and moving innovations, capitalizing on them and making the economy a better place, the world a better place, and other people healthy. So I come from, let's put the slides up. So I come from Cambridge Biomedical Research Campus. There's a newly sort of evolving and developing biotech campus where I work at the Medical Research Council Laboratory of Molecular Biology, that is at the Adderhooks Hospital, that hosts as well Cancer Research UK, Cambridge Research Institute, and a couple of other Medical Research Council laboratories. In addition to that, I come from a very vibrant university entrepreneurial environment where students are very, very active, linking up with venture capitalists and angels to build their ideas into something useful. Some of these societies are very interesting, and this presentation that I'm going to give today is going to be through that perspective, coming from a vibrant biotech environment, doing research in that environment, and kind of thinking of some recommendations how one can go about and try to create that in the Baltic states, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia. Also, I'll focus on this new wave of innovation that is a little bit more modern than the standard biotechnology model, where if someone develops a molecule to make a laboratory reagent or creates a drug and then markets that. So I'll talk about this sort of new step. And my talk will go through several hotspots. That will be sequencing, DNA sequencing specifically, wireless medical devices, and big data. And then I'll talk a little bit about some ideas that we could all use to build that up together. I believe that medicine is about to change and undergo a massive evolution that has never been before. We're going to revolutionize how we actually run medicine, how we perceive it, and how we, as patients, doctors, treat. Medicine has not gone through this massive process of digitization, like other walks of life. You'll know that a lot of younger people spend a lot of time on their computers talking to their friends on Facebook, watching YouTube videos, and perhaps all of you do your banking online. You go buy your groceries online. You don't need to walk to the supermarket and buy them anymore. So these central digitized digital solutions through our mobile devices like phones truly change the way we behave in our everyday life. And you perhaps will agree with me that that has not yet happened in the medical system. You don't send an email to your doctor saying, oh, what do you feel about this blood pressure that I have? And this is the type of change that I'm talking about. Someone has estimated that there are more cell phones than toothbrushes and many more cell phones than toilets in the world. And I don't know whether that is true or not, but it shows the point that we had a massive expansion in that sense. So there's one thing and one reason why I believe that this revolution in medicine will happen, and that's purely because we finally have a technical capability to digitize a human being. What do I mean by digitize human being? I mean that we can sequence the DNA, the building blocks of us as humans. Second thing, we developed small, tiny devices that can track every movement and count every heartbeat, always record our blood pressure and save that, so that can be used for diagnosis and disease prevention. And the third sort of pillar for that as well is medical imaging that has finally been developed to allow very detailed 3D reconstructions of organs and everything inside our bodies. So I'll move on to speak about the first thing, the DNA sequencing. I would like to draw your attention to this graph here on the left. And the blue line is representing a concept called Moore's law, and it's a concept known as a rule of thumb known through the history of computing hardware that the number of transistors that can be placed on an integrated circuit doubles every 2 years. So effectively, you have experienced all that when you buy a computer for yourself or your child. In 2 years' time, you have to buy a new one because the first one that you bought can no longer support some new games or some new programs. So, everyone perhaps in this room will be able to see that this change in the digital sort of world actually is quite rapid. Now, I'd like you to compare that with this orange line, and that is the cost of sequencing the human genome. And it's by far faster than the change in technology. So more than 10 years ago, I needed 2 fingers to count the number of human genomes sequenced. Around 3 years ago, I needed my fingers and my 2 hands to count the number of genomes sequenced. And journal Science reports that in 2011, it's going to be 30,000 human genomes sequenced. And you see a little map there, and that's a map of the Faroe Islands, where they have started a project to sequence every single individual, which is around 50,000 people. They're prone for cardiac disorders, and they just really want to sample the population. So projects like these are starting, and they're really overtaking any type of technological advance that we have seen so far. All of this presents massive opportunities to handle our data, to understand it, to mine the data. Data is one thing, but knowledge is another thing, and that's where a lot of commercial opportunities lie. Like in companies 23andMe, is perhaps one of the famous ones that is available in the United States, where you send a saliva sample and they sequence your genome. However, they don't do full genome sequencing. They do something a little bit more general called SNP sequencing. What they are able to tell is from various population studies, they're able to pinpoint or perhaps predict which diseases you might have in the future. Also, there are cases where people discovered relatives because they found that someone else had done the same sequence in the company, had very similar genetic profiles. So these type of services are being out there. We're finally able to kind of bring them from the lab to kind of consumers, and they really find interest in them. So I do find that there are a lot of opportunities there. On the bottom, you see 3 different machines that you're sequencing with 3 different companies. And Oxford Nanopore is a technology that announced a couple of months ago that they can sequence full genome in 15 minutes on a thumb drive by the end of the year. So it's quite staggering. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about are these wireless devices. It's a little bit disturbing to think that some sort of machine will be sort of in your pocket and you can begin actually monitoring everything, saving everything. But then that actually presents so many opportunities because a doctor can rely on so much more data and make much more informed decisions about what you as an individual need. One can send that to a doctor, to the hospital, to the GP. Here I have some examples of similar technologies. So one of them is this AliveCore. It's an iPhone case that they effectively can do electrocardiogram without any equipment that is quite a similar quality than what you get in the hospital. Quite famous US cardiologist, Dr. Topol, is a very big proponent of all this movement. They always carries similar gadgets. And once he was in a plane and someone had a heart problem, he was able to put that and actually diagnose that person that he was kind of having a heart attack or precursors to heart attack, and they actually landed the plane early to have immediate medical attention. So these things are already around. Another one that is quite interesting, I find, is the portable ultrasound device, where you can really actually have medical quality ultrasound images, working with you. But there are many, many more things. I just don't have time and space to display them all. Things, for example, like for sleeping, for personal sleep coach. You have a headband, and all your sleeping patterns are recorded, and you can even be coached to be a better sleeper. So there are these devices that gather this data, and there are people, mainly in the US, but also in Europe, that are banding together and have movements called, for example, quantified self, and self-tracking. So they're trying to learn about themselves, gathering as much data as possible. And there is another interesting initiative called everyheartbeat.org. They just launched, and they're trying to have people submit their heart rhythm or heartbeat data through very similar devices, or just putting their finger on a phone camera, and effectively the cameras are so developed now that you can really get a good sense of what's the heart. And their goal is to really aggregate all the data and effectively create a Facebook of healthcare, where you have your family and they would be able to monitor your status. If you have a grandmother that is far away, you can in fact see if her heartbeat is not really up to some sort of limits, so you can potentially go back and say hello to her. That sounds like that sounds like a joke, but actually we are at the stage where we can have technologies that would warn doctors before, for example, a heart attack occurs. And I find that staggering. So to move on, the third thing is the data. As you can understand, all these processes gather massive amounts of data that could channel from the patients online. Right now we have massive data. There are tons of videos submitted to YouTube, creates massive amounts of data. Google is collecting everything on the internet. That's mainly targeted towards commercialization and understanding the behavior of customers. Biological data is a little bit more difficult and a little bit more complex. And there are many issues like large data sets, perhaps the confidentiality, etc. But someone that will be able to start solving these problems will actually have a very, very good position in the market to offer these solutions while putting things on the cloud and just to giving services to the people that they need, for example, hospitals or GP offices. BGI is a Beijing Genomics Institute, and it's one of the largest DNA institutes or DNA or genomics institutes in the world. And they produce so much data that they can't send it via internet online. So they sequence genomes for people all around the world. By people, I mean effectively research institutes. And what they do, they actually record them in hard drives and FedEx them. So basically send them as mail to the people that ordered that. And that is a little bit of a sort of old age solution to this problem. So there are so many things that can be done about that as well. Now, getting back to the, creating business and creating a valuable, successful biotech cluster, and Script Business Insights kind of published this sort of map of what are the qualities for our institute, maybe institution or some sort of country to have a successful biotech cluster. And by listening to all the talks today, as well as looking at looking at Baltic region, I truly believe that all of these are fulfilled. Examples like Skype and Barclays investing in Lithuania, Skype becoming a very successful startup in Estonia. Also by technology companies like Fermentus that are really rooted, show that we have all the potential that we need. We just need to start leveraging all that potential to create a successful ecosystem so that things can organically happen. So that people start talking to each other. People like me doing research, people who have money, people who actually have good ideas and understand how something could be useful to someone. I think that it is essential to join forces because a lot can be done by talking to each other and communicating. In science, that's especially important. I think that there are government-funded excellence centers, and I think that they're the way to go. I think that there needs to be a very small set of very well-defined grants. Earlier today was mentioned that perhaps in a larger scale, it's not ideal to fund some specific niches, because maybe that might be used to make the economy better in general. But I truly believe that having a good role model, having something that works, and being able to show it and be inspired by that is very important as well. So I would say targeting some particular hotspots would be actually a good idea. And of course, integrating the biotechnology industry, healthcare institutions, especially universities, and also very vibrant technology startup communities that I'm in contact with in Lithuania through Twitter feeds and their events, and I find that very interesting. To conclude my talk, I hope I convinced you that we're in quite exciting times, and times with many, many opportunities just waiting to happen. I think that if we focus especially our IT or computer science expertise that we definitely have in the Baltic region, we can find solutions for DNA sequencing, these wireless medical devices, and handling that data that's coming out. We have to start think global. We can't hope that local markets will produce enough fluctuation in terms of finances. So I think we have to start global, test things local, project to the global market, whether it is the European Union or the United States. I think that we need to collaborate between the countries, between the institutes, and I think that we need to start thinking to provide solutions, not just business to business, but take out things from the laboratory, take things from the hospital, and bring it to the people that might actually find that useful. So I'd like to mention that there's an interesting event happening in Lithuania in September. They're organizing an interesting event called Life Sciences Baltics, which will be a conference, which will also be an opportunity to network, to meet businesses, to meet potential academics and in general to sort of kick off this movement that can make the Baltic region the next big biotechnology hotspot in Europe. I thank you for your attention. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm on Twitter, so if you want to find me, you can go there and send me an email or come over to Cambridge. Thank you very much.
Hi everybody. First, thanks primarily to Alan for inviting me here. And to go straight to business, I would like to talk about mainly two things today. And it kind of links to some of the earlier topics you heard before. The first is energy governance in Estonia, relating to growing debates of what the structure of future supply of energy is going to be in Estonia in a state of increasing uncertainty. And the second is kind of related, is the Estonians, this is about the Estonian ambitions to increase shale oil production and export this technology to other countries which are interested in exploiting the oil shale resources. And in the first half of the presentation, I'm going to sort of give more a simplistic and a descriptive overview of what the main issues are in Estonia, what the main keywords are. And I'm kind of going to rush through because, as somebody said earlier, you can't really discuss energy within 50 minutes. But if you forgive me, I'll just give you like a quick overview. And in the second half of the presentation, I'm going to be a bit more theoretical, discuss my recent work, my recent writing, and then see how we can bring these two things together, how we can think about technology development and technology transfer in shale oil production. At the interface, if you consider this interface between local anxieties about the future of the energy economy and global ambitions about technology transfer. So this paper, this presentation is based on my DPhil research in Oxford University, which I have done for the last 3.5 years, and I'm hoping to submit the thesis by the end of this year. It is mostly about the politics of non-conventional oil development, focusing on oil shale as a non-conventional oil resource. And the empirical focus has been mostly on the Estonian oil shale industry, although not exclusively. My research has taken me to several different sites. I've done in-depth fieldwork in Estonia, did about, I would say, approximately 40 interviews and lots of different activities. But I've also been doing interviews, site visits, and participant observation in cities like London and Brussels. I've been to 2 places in USA, Colorado and Utah. And my last field visit is going to be in 2 weeks' time, and this takes me to Jordan. You'll hear in a minute why Jordan is important in terms of oil shale development. The photos you're going to see in this presentation are taken during my fieldwork, and I'd also like to acknowledge the sources of funding. I've got the full doctorate scholarship from the Estonian government and various funding for conferences and field visits from these different institutions. Estonia is a unique country in the world which has a national energy economy based largely on the exploitation of a single indigenous fossil fuel resource, which is oil shale. And so far, Estonia has been mostly burning this oil shale, similarly to coal, in power plants for the production of electricity. And over the last decades, oil shale has accounted for approximately, always more or less, to 90% of electricity produced in Estonia, as you can see in this figure, and about 60% of primary energy mix. This makes Estonia one of the most energy independent countries in the EU, although not completely energy independent in terms of also transport fuel use. But at the same time, it also makes it one of the most fossil fuel dependent and carbon intensive economies in the world. So Estonian problem is not has, as it was talked in the morning, the dependency on a single external supplier. The Estonian problem is the dependency on a single internal supplier. The Russian gas is really the only source of gas, but at the same time, gas only accounts for 15% of the energy mix compared to oil shale. And not only this, following the closure of Ignalina nuclear power plant in 2010, Estonia has become a net exporter of electricity, has been exporting increasing amounts of electricity to the Baltic market and also to Finland. Another important feature is that the Estonian energy economy has shown long-term resistance to EU energy market integration, liberalization and unbundling of energy services. And today, the majority of oil shale mining, electricity production, and the provision of energy services to the society is still carried out by a single energy monopoly called Eesti Energia, internationally Enefit, which is 100% state-owned. And it should be also mentioned that while most of the oil shale is being used for electricity production, about 1/3 of the resource also goes for shale oil production. Now, despite nearly a century of oil shale exploitation in Estonia and increasing opportunities to export outside of Estonia both electricity and shale oil, the energy economy is today faced with increasing insecurity and uncertainty. And these derive from three main factors. First is the EU climate and environmental policy, especially regarding restrictions on emissions and new rules coming for carbon trading and carbon emissions from next year. Second is European energy market integration and competition, also starting from the end of this year. And in combination, these two things are anticipated in Estonia to seriously challenge the national energy economy, because carbon prices considered to become the main driver for electricity pricing, which might render Estonian oil shale electricity uncompetitive in the open energy market. These are the main two issues being discussed in Estonia at the moment. There's a third issue, which is the declining quality and quantity of the Estonian oil shale resources, which is not so much of a short-term concern or in terms of 2-3 next years, but it is definitely an issue which nevertheless has become somewhat more silenced compared to these two more urgent issues above. So in this situation where there's very little time remaining under the possible decline in the Estonian oil shale industry, there's now increasing public debate about the future of the national energy economy, and of course not so public debates. And if so far energy has been considered in Estonia as a strictly expert domain, something which non-expert or lay people should not really discuss or and usually don't dare to dispute, then now this sphere of energy is opening up to a more and more sort of public debate and contestation in Estonia. And moreover, the experts themselves, the elites of the society, are themselves not really agreeing with each other anymore what the basic values and what the basic principles of energy security and independence are in Estonia. And in this situation, the dominant discourse of what energy security has meant so far in Estonia is shifting from the left to the right. I mean, the left one kind of represents the historical understanding based on the state-planned economy of what energy security is for Estonia. The right is more towards market liberalism, but I would say there's no clear sort of energy transition from one model to another, but rather there's a mixture of different visions and different debates related to combining these different components. And interestingly, what is a new component in this discourse of energy security is the idea of increasing and using oil shale for liquid fuel production rather than for electricity production. So to summarize this part, and this is a very great oversimplification of really complex issues, but in principle, Estonia is faced with the following energy dilemmas. So It could be that it's actually a trilemma. And one is to continue using with oil shale electricity as it has been to date, the business as usual scenario by trying to get even more exemptions from the European Union in terms of carbon pricing and other things. Another possibility is to move to alternative sources of energy in terms of electricity production. And yet again, another alternative would be at the same time start using oil shale for shale oil production. And now the rest of my presentation is going to really down the road from oil shale electricity to shale oil. Again, there's no decision taken which one of the directions Estonia should take. Rather, there's ongoing debate, and I would say the government is working on in all three directions at the same time. So this increasing uncertainty has not only caused anxieties and debates in Estonia, but at the same time, has also caused what I would call a window of opportunity for the oil shale industry and then also for the Estonian government to try and monetize the existing expertise in oil shale exploitation and export the Estonian technology. So as mentioned already, the production of shale oil in Estonia is increasing, but also on the other hand, the industry, the state monopoly, specifically Estonia, is now eager to export the Estonian technology and know-how to other countries who want to develop their oil shale resources. And as a rule, these countries are not Kyoto Annex I countries, so they exist outside of the climate policy regime, the more stringent climate policy regime. And so far, Estonia has employed mainly two strategies. One is to simply sell the technology, these are the yellow countries on the map, to the other parties who are interested in using the Estonian technology. The most important project is technology sales to China, but Estonia has also been offering consultancy to Middle East countries like Morocco, Syria, and Egypt, and explore the resources. But even more importantly, another strategy is to try and grab land, grab resources, and try and develop projects on its own outside of Estonia. And there are two major projects. One is in Jordan, a company called Jordan Oil and Energy, which first was fully owned by the Estonians, now 65%. And another is Enabit American Oil in America, in Utah, close to Bernal. The Estonians have acquired concession agreements and leased land for oil shale development, and in Jordan also for oil shale power production. The grey countries on the map are the countries which also develop oil shale, but it's so far are not part of the sort of the Estonian expansion at the moment. And now this comes to the second part of my talk, and I'm trying to be sort of a bit more theoretical. I have to say I haven't presented this anywhere yet, and it's a part of the chapter I'm currently writing. But I'm using recent work in the literature of economic sociology, social theory literature, which is largely based on science and technology studies. And I'm especially using a very specific term of Michel Callon, and trying to conceptualize the world oil shale industries as techno-economic networks. So the problem with transferring the Estonian technology to other parts of the world, to other oil shale deposits, is that it's not straightforward business. There's no united and networked oil shale industry in the world. But rather we could talk about highly heterogeneous yet coordinated sets of different things, and really the idea of techno-economic networks turns attention to both the interactions between human economic actors, but also material and technical elements. And if we try to think of these different oil shale industries in different parts of the world, the problem really is, first of all, that there's no such thing as oil shale as a single entity. It consists of very heterogeneous deposits, very different sediments, with very different material properties. The second thing is that the technologies and knowledge of extraction, which is available today for shale oil production, is very much locally situated and site-specific and bound to the specific resource. And third thing is that the oil shale has become economically and politically acceptable to exploit in national circumstances. So rather than thinking that oil shale production becomes economically feasible when oil prices are sufficiently high, which is a very common assumption but very simplistic at the same time, it would rather make sense to sort of expand this understanding, and what I think is at stake here is more the project of conventionalizing this unconventional technology and unconventional resource, which has three major dimensions. First of all is economization, rendering this industry economic, but it should not be understood here as sort of entering to the market of a post-Soviet industry, but rather, according to economic sociology, we should not think of the economy and the market as sort of pre-existing spheres into which one can enter and introduce changes, but rather we can talk about economies and markets in plural, and the processes of economization and marketization, which means that economies and markets are brought into being in diverse, dynamic, and geographically specific forms by both human and actors and technical and material elements. The second dimension in this project is innovation, which is seen here as a non-linear yet path-dependent process, and it's closely linked to the processes of economization and creation of markets. And the third dimension I would add is sort of the politics at large, the contemplation and public debate of this sort of thing happening. Just a very quick look into the literature. The point is really that economic is not supposed to be a sort of pre-existing phase, which then defines the success or failure of this technology, but rather we should think of how economy is created, how markets are being created together with innovation, and how this process is being contested at the same time. So if Estonia or Enefit now claims that they have the only commercially proven oil shale technology in the world, and they try to export this technology, then looking back in the history, what is in Estonia? There are two important factors of innovation. One is that there's only one single shale oil plant which is based on this Galatsa-based technology which they want to export. There are the other plants based on different technologies. It has been maintained over the last 30 years by a handful of company operators with very limited availability time. And it has not really been part of, after the original inventions by the Russian engineers, of innovation process in Estonia. So we could call it rather as an industrial science, which is not really linked to universities. And so in order to conventionalize this technology and export this technology to different countries, the question is now for Estonia, first of all, what counts as a working technology? If this technology can be scaled up, used at the proper availability time, and made economic. And the second is the quality of the produced oil. Because shale oil doesn't mean that it's a homogeneous stuff, but it can be, the quality can be amazing a lot. Regarding economization, again, this Estonian case could be regarded as a specific local techno-economic network. This means that not only the technology is site-specific, but so is the economy about it. Shale oil production up to date has survived as being an integrated component of the electricity production system in Estonia. And among other things, this is again a hugely complex issue, it has enjoyed the same level of state subsidized, low taxes, free carbon emissions, quota, and so on. And the market demand for this shale oil has not so far been an issue. If they haven't been able to sell this shale oil, then shale oil has been simply used in the electricity production component process as a fuel input. So the question really is, if this sort of production can be scaled up, and if the Estonian ideas of what is economic and what is technologically acceptable as a working technology can be universalized and standardized and applied in other contexts, like, for example, these oil shale fields in Utah, which is now Estonian property. And this is really the last main point. It's the third dimension, which is a major challenge for the company to tackle, is that there has been increasing contestation of this expansion in Estonia. The company is now being seen becoming bigger than the nation itself. And the different sectors of society who are increasingly disputing this sort of global expansion and global development. Several academics and business elites in Estonia are sort of more technologically specific, and they doubt if this technology would be actually working in other environmental and socio-political conditions. And many doubt if this technology is in fact working at all, because it's very hard to gain any independent information in this. And many regard the sort of Eesti Energia's ambition at the moment as just a gamble about getting access to investment capital. But also it has become very much entangled with this sort of wider publics, and this brings me back to the talk about energy governance in the beginning of my presentation. Issues of technology transfer and technology development have become entangled with local issues about what the future of Estonian energy economy is going to be. And projects in Jordan and USA specifically have been contested by saying that this affects the price of electricity in Estonia, the maintenance of infrastructure networks, and vulnerability of customers. And it's been worsened by the attitude of the company, who says that, I'm just quoting the CEO here, that we are not discussing it, we are simply doing it.
Thank you, Gary.
So, hello. I hope you can hear me, right? It's a great pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me, and it's a great pleasure to be also the last presenter today. So, my name is Tauri Tuvikene. I'm a PhD student at UCL in the same university. I'm funded by Archimedes Foundation from Estonia, and I'm working more broadly on the state intervention and individual freedom, or basically the clash between state trying to regulate and individuals trying to be separate from the state. And I'm looking at this kind of clash in relation to car parking. So it's actually, the presentation is quite a lot about car parking, to be honest. And let's see. So we have some cars parking there. So what you can see is the car parking, on the one hand, is a question of cars simply taking space away, like a space which should be something else, whether it's a pedestrian road where people want to walk, but also from the grass, for instance. So the car parking is a problem of car invasion, but also it's a problem or a question of space being used for car parking instead of some other uses like parks or whatever. So it's you can see the city of Tallinn, for instance, is quite a lot actually taken over by cars. So what I also should mention actually here is how this kind of post-Soviet change is actually also, one important part is the change of mobility from the public transit to the individual mode of movement using cars then. And on the fourth picture down below here, you can see also that this kind of space, which is for parking, can be like a cycle parking or bike parking. And what it also mentions here is this kind of the notion of that alternative mobilities. That actually, what is one of the ideas is how car parking can be used to regulate mobility, to limit parking in order for people to use some alternative modes. So this pictures actually capture that. So what I'm working is this general notion of automobility. And as John already has mentioned, that it's the system of automobility. So instead of thinking about one car as an object, it's about thinking the car in relation to the variety of objects and the spaces. So it's thinking about the roads or the motorways, for instance, what the money that goes into building the motorways. It is about petrol, about how, like, I mean, you can think about wars in Iraq, or I mean, how this kind of an object, an everyday object, becomes linked up with question on much, I mean, wider level. But the thing with cars, or this system of automobility, is that about 95% of the time cars are parked. So what they do most of the time, they're parked. And another thing is that if there are difficulties with parking the cars, it is challenging individual freedom. Right. So I'm closing to my topic here. What I'm thinking about is in terms of this kind of state phobia. And this is a notion I picked up from Michel Foucault, book or his lecture series on the birth of biopolitics, and it's a notion like, and it's very well described by one art historian, that there's at least one thing I fear as much as atomic bomb, and that is the invasion of humanity by the state. Or the other way, as Michel Foucault puts it, it's a sort of genetic continuity or evolutionary implication between different forms of the state, with the administrative state, the helper state, the bureaucratic state, the fascist state, and the totalitarian state, all being the successive branches of one and the same great tree of state control in its continuous and unified expansion. So it's kind of, all the states become the same idea of the state, and all the states become criticized. So it's kind of disqualification by the worst. So every state is the worst kind of state, which for me, in working in Estonian case, seems very much like relevant to understand in case of then the Soviet history. Right, and this presentation is actually just part of my PhD project, and as I'm on the second year at the moment, and I'm currently on my fieldwork in Tallinn, and I wanted to talk more about law, and specifically by how Anneli Albi, who is also working in, she's in UK, in Kent University, she's a jurisprudence lecturer, I think. So as he has mentioned, the law is not value neutral, but it's linked to the main ideologies in society, which in Estonian case mean radical liberal economic ideology. So the law becomes linked up how we understand the state and how we understand individuals. So it's an active participant in the social process. And I'm thinking of diverging logics here, which main part is this kind of legal logic, what is the law, and administrative logic, which is how the state apparatus is working. So this kind of two logics don't match with each other. So what I've been doing now, I'm still in the process, so I wouldn't say it's the final conclusions, but I've been working through Supreme Court decisions. And it's the highest level of the court. And in the last 17 years, there's around 20 decisions in the Supreme Court that are about car parking and different questions. So I brought out some samples here, so you can see there is, for instance, the question of whether it's legal to enter the outlast money for entering the old town, for instance. Is parking fee a fee, or is it a tax? So this kind of like almost philosophical question, but not philosophical. The difference between the delay for pay and parking fine, so it's a different way of naming the same thing with different implications. How to exhibit this kind of 15-minute free parking allowance. I mean, this kind of very different questions around parking, or interpreting traffic signs, but also has been done by Supreme Court, etc. But I'm focusing on two of them. The first is wheel clamping, which I guess people in UK probably know because it's done very much in UK by private companies. But in Estonia, it's unconstitutional, not just illegal, but unconstitutional. The second case is it all right to punish car owner or should an offender caught on the scene? So it's this kind of practical question of how we can punish a traffic offender or parking offender. So start with the first case about wheel clamp. So the question actually became down to the question of property rights can be restricted only by the law. So there was, but the law itself has to be constitutional. So it's kind of, yeah, the law becomes linked up to the constitution. And sorry, yeah. So the case is that it was done in the mid 1990s. So it started in 1991 and it ended well, in 1998, 1999. It was actually, Tallinn municipality started to do that through their own act. So they wrote an act, like, okay, we legalized wheel clamping in our city in order to make people pay for parking. But then a person turned into court. First of all, it turned into the Chancellor of Justice, who then turned into court. But I mean, the Chancellor of Justice was then arguing, which was also the Supreme Court decision in the end, that when you restrict the use of property, there must be a law allowing you to do that, or the municipality to do that. So it was this kind of diverse decision that on the one hand, parking is a local question. It's not the state level question. It's not the parliamentary level question. But if it concerns individual property, which in this case is a car, there must be law that allows you to do that. So that was how the Supreme Court was ruling in that case. Well, there was, for a brief time, there was a parking law as well, but it ended in 1991, and since 1999, it's unconstitutional for the state to clamp a car, which actually, by a private company, can be done through different laws, but the state can't do that. It's very interesting. So what we have to see here is a constitution, or this document, the constitution. It's in Estonia it's since 1992, or it's based on the previous 1938 and the previous constitution. It has changed very minor changes, 3 times. So it's very stable. It's around 6,700 words, so it's not huge. It's not very short as well. But one of the main things in the constitution is that the priority is given to individual rights. So individual rights are really the central part of the constitution, or they are termed as fundamental rights. And one of the fundamental rights is the right for property. There are also like rights for self-realization, rights for movement, rights for entrepreneurship, or this kind of things. And there are also different, what I call amplifiers of the constitution that kind of make it more important, which are the Chancellor of Justice, a specific institution only in 3 countries, in Estonia, Finland, and Sweden, and the Supreme Court, which again also you can go with the case to the Supreme Court and you can argue your case as more important. So as this lever here is saying, it's kind of the constitution is actually supporting private interest more than public interest in that case, for instance, regulating car use. So yeah, this is a very interesting idea of freedom, that an individual has a limitless sphere of freedom as shaped by the Constitution. And state power is allowed to limit it only when it is able to justify the measure. There's this kind of idea that it's a final report by the Constitutional Expert Commission, so it's also a very high-level idea, it's a very high-level opinion of Constitution. It's an understanding that there can be such thing as a limitless freedom, which I feel is kind of, I mean, it's kind of bordering the utopia, but let's see. So if you do a thought experiment, we can think that the restriction of freedom, the restriction on freedom is allowed if it is well justified. So you can restrict freedom if you justify it. The justification should be in accordance with the Constitution. The Constitution gives priority to individual freedoms, and the restriction on individual freedom is allowed when it does not limit freedom, or limits it in a way that does not significantly change the nature of freedom. Therefore, we finally get to the conclusion that the state regulation exists only in the general framework of the individual freedom. So this kind of individual freedom is the main idea that binds every state action. So the second case concerns the notion of, it's a legal notion, so judgment by default and responsibility of the owner. I don't know how well they are understood in English. Basically, it's the question of whether you can punish the car owner or you have to get the offender right on the spot when that violates the parking rules. So it's also, again, it's not this kind of small scale practical. I mean, it is a small scale practical problem, but it's also something that was discussed in Constitution by judges and lawyers. So it reaches much higher levels in society than simply this kind of practical everyday matter. So the dilemma is basically only if you look at the legal logic, then only those committing offense should be punished, right? On the other hand, car owner and car user might not be the same person. So the one who drives the car might not own the car. Car owner can be identified through the registration number of the car. So the only information on the car is the car owner and not the car user. But how to get to know who was the user, and then is the state allowed to punish the owner? So the Supreme Court reached the decision that the owner should not be presumed to be guilty, and effort should be made to find out the actual parking offender, instead of simply making the parking ticket for the car owner. Postimees, the biggest daily newspaper, had this, the main editorial saying that farewell to anonymity, and was arguing that if a person can even defend himself, for instance, explain why he parked here and now, then it is an unconstitutional situation that might be an explanation of the Supreme Court's decision in simple words. Parking controller has to find out who parked wrongly and write the ticket to the person. It seems in principle excellent. But then if you look at the municipality parking official, then how he says, for that a controller has to see who parked the car at that particular spot, and he has to be there when this erroneous driver returns to the car. So you have to imagine a parking controller seeing a car violating rules and then standing there and waiting when somebody comes back. And first of all, he also has to know actually who was the person who parked the car there. So I mean, in an administrative level, it's impossible, but on a legal level, it makes sense. So it's kind of very interesting ideas there. So the municipality in that case had a material solution by putting using traffic signs. But anyway, the final solution actually was this kind of defining the same thing in a different way with different implications. So the parking fee then was turned into parking tax. Parking fine was turned into fine for delay. And using this kind of as a parking fee, not as a fee, but as a tax, it opened up for different ways how law could be used for regulating parking. So I can't explain it much more, but it had some side effects, like having two different sets of controllers who write up tickets when there's a person parking at a wrong place, and who write up tickets when there's somebody who hasn't paid for parking. So there's a different person basically covering the same space but controlling two different things. So what I want to conclude here is this kind of ideas of state phobia and post-socialism becoming linked, and the idea of how there is a mismatch between administrative logic and legal logic. So that there is this expectation from the state that are so demanding in terms of freedom that they become close to utopia, that you basically can, in that, like in the second case, you basically cannot control car parking if you try to do it according to legal system, or if you follow the Supreme Court decision, it's basically impossible. So it's this kind of almost a utopian notion of freedom. So the two implications, or rather like points for discussion, is the centrality of law in discussing administrative regulations, or whether the law is maybe too central in this question. Then focus should be put more on how we solve a practical question at hand. And the second point is that maybe we look too much on this conflict between private and public interest, and we should see instead of how private interest is also enabled by public interest. So in the previous day, we had a discussion also like the enforcement of private property, for instance. We need a state in order to have a private property, so it shouldn't seen so much as a conflicting thing, but also as this public bodies or state kind of enabling people to have private property and to use it. So it should be more mixed together. So I think I would end here, and I think we have time for discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Kalle. Before coming to SSEES, I used to work at the Estonian Parliament, and I think the single biggest surprise while working there was how much time was spent on discussing the parking regulations for the MPs and people working for the parliament. So I think you are onto something. This is perhaps the biggest single problem in Estonia.